the classic chorizo. I used to do one which is really fascinating. It's really easy, and I don't even have to write a recipe for anyone for this. Take a fresh chorizo sausage, just roast it enough so that you can slice it in pieces, and then top it with red wine, and you're poaching it. So you're actually cooking the chorizo in red wine. So all of the garlic and paprika inside the sausage comes out into the wine, kind of makes its own sauce. And the chorizo takes on a whole different flavor because it's been poached in the red wine. And then just pairing that with a classic Rioja, maybe a crianza or something. The chorizo, I think, is going to overpower it a little bit if you have something that's too big and bold. It's kind of like Spain on a little plate, that little bit of meat and that little bit of fat and the little bit of red wine sauce and then the classic Rioja. That's pretty much what everyone would have at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon in Spain.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 49. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Stephanie Piché, one of the most knowledgeable people I've interviewed on food and wine pairing. I'll introduce Stephanie fully when we jump into this episode. I'll also put links to Stephanie's website and social media handles in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/49. Speaking of food and wine pairing, if you want to get a free copy of my ultimate food and wine pairing guide, just email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know what you like about the podcast and what I can do to improve it for you. By the way, I've done several rehearsals for my new free wine and food pairing class with a practice audience and received some terrific feedback and encouragement. I know you're going to love it. Be sure you're on my contact list so that you know when you can sign up to join me in a class. You can make sure you're on that list at nataliemclean.com/join us. It's called the 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever. You'll learn about that, plus about my new in-depth paid course called the Wine Smart Course, a full-bodied framework to taste, pair, and buy wines like a pro. Now, just before we dive into the show, I'd like to give a shout-out to one of our listeners, Peter Humphreys from Hamilton, Ontario, who emailed me to say, "Thank you for this week's episode on Texas wines. I learn something new every week. I had no idea that Texas even had a wine region, let alone one that is large. I was intrigued that one of the most popular grapes makes up a large portion of their production, Tempranillo, which I generally associate with Spain. This episode was most enjoyable." Well, Peter, I am so glad you enjoyed episode 46. If you missed that, please go back and give it a listen. I know that you're going to enjoy this one with Stephanie. On with the show. I am so glad you're here with me because we have a special treat. She's got some terrific stories. So let me tell you about our guest, the producer and host of the popular podcast Flying for Flavor. She is a chef on a continuing quest for new flavors and experiences, having already traveled the world to 36 different countries to gather insight into international travel, luxury dining, local recipes, and the world's best wines. With her own website and podcast dedicated to all things food, drink, and travel, Stephanie meets, chats, and consults with people around the world through Skype, social media, and in person whenever she can. She shares her passions with grace and panache in her signature, love this, sparkle And she joins me now from her home in Sudbury. Welcome, Stephanie Piché. Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Oh, Stephanie, I've been waiting and wanting to interview you for a while because I've listened to your podcast and I just love the wine travel stories that you share. You always have such a good time. I want to be one of your friends on that podcast. So
I told you we can arrange it. I think you
Okay.
need to come and drink with us at one point.
Absolutely. I'm in. So I was just online in my private Facebook group with my students, and one of the three wines we were tasting was Montes Alpha Cabernet Sauvignon. And right now it's about $19.95, though it's on sale in the LCBO. I just think it's such great value. You're a big fan too, eh, Stephanie?
Huge fan. Yeah, I did a tasting at the Montes Caken group probably about a year or so ago when they were in Toronto. It was so good. I know.
Oh, lucky. And of course, their flagship is the Purple Angel, which is like a cult classic. People just go rabid over that one. So yes, it sells out, I should say.
It certainly does. It's phenomenal.
Absolutely. So Stephanie, you've been to so many countries and had so many experiences. Where to start? Tell us about the secret cellar in Nice, France. What was all that about?
I think that was a bit of luck more than anything else. I have to admit that people always say luck is that cross between preparation and opportunity or whatever it is. We'd just been to France. I think it was our first time. And there was a tiny little store. It was like half wine shop, half food shop. You know, sometimes you get those little gourmet type shops. It was so small that besides the width of the doorway, there wasn't even much of a window. And when we went in, it kind of broke into little winding rooms. It was a very old building. And when I started asking questions about what wines they kept in stock and what do you have and what's interesting, because he liked practicing English with me. And of course, I was trying to practice my French. Being Canadian and all, I'm still not that good at my French. He saw how passionate we were about wine and he said, pick a bottle. He said, if you want to open it, you can have a glass. I said, oh, that's great. So I went to go and pick a bottle and there was, can't remember now which one it was. I think it was just a classic white Burgundy or something. He said, well, follow me. Considering this is how brave I am, I said, sure, I'll come into the basement with you. So it was a strange man. I mean, it was just insane. So we walked downstairs and he had almost like an old cellar where he had an old leather sofa. There were wines that were so dusty from like the 1910s, 1920s. There's walls and walls. And he left us down there with our bottle of wine. He said, you come back upstairs whenever you're ready, take in the ambiance. And he said, enjoy yourself. So we basically spent our first time in France sitting in this stunning cellar with some of the oldest vintages of French wines. You can't even put into words the history that's around you with something like that.
Absolutely. It's bottled memories and people who have died since touched those vines that made that wine. But my question is, did he leave you with a corkscrew as well?
Oh, no, he had already opened it, brought us glasses. Okay. Oh, yeah.
No, but I mean for the other bottles.
No, we were actually looking around. It was a big joke. I'm wondering if he took inventory recently. Well, we wouldn't do that. We were just so honored that he trusted us enough to let us be down there. I couldn't say no. It was a nice welcome to France, put it that way.
Nice. Very nice. Nice and Nice. I just want to dig into some of these different stories before I go through some of the other questions.
Sure.
Now, you were in Australia sipping on wine, and I think there was a kangaroo nearby. What was going on there?
It's like the quintessential Australian experience. I can't remember which winery it was, but kangaroos run around there like raccoons or stray cats would be around here. It's kind of surreal to be sitting there. They're not afraid of you. Well, actually, they are a little bit. They're a little timid. So he was basically nibbling on grass and things in between the vines where we were standing. And then just to make it seem like a movie, there was helicopters that was taking off just in behind the parking lot, the back parking lot where we were. So we had this strangely perfect scenario of this kangaroo sitting there who didn't seem to mind this helicopter taking a great person on and off. It was just this combination of all these things happening at the same time. It was really kind of an unnerving experience, but it kind of summed up the entire experience in Australia, where it wasn't
Sipping
just
wines, vines, kangaroos.
There's kangaroos, and then it was the luxury of some of these vineyards that are out in not overly populated areas, like in the center of Hunter Valley and some of the smaller areas that are mostly farm towns. There are people who helicopter in and out to go in and get their wines.
Nice life.
I know, exactly.
Are kangaroos docile? Like, do you need to worry about them at all being that close?
No, they're very big. As long as they don't consider you a threat, that's fine.
Okay.
My husband went out for a walk early every morning. There's a couple of videos kicking around someplace on Facebook that we posted, but he got fairly close to them. They would sort of stop and check him out, but they're usually 6 to 8 feet tall on out. Like they're big and they're very powerful. So we've heard some horror stories when we were there. I don't think I'll share those here.
No, that's okay. But
I'm scared of those.
Well, completely flipping a switch though, did you ever have kangaroo as a dish?
I did.
Me too.
I did. You know what? It's one of those things that you just have to try when you're there.
Yeah.
And it was okay. Actually, my co-host Cynthia was just in Australia not that long ago. She was living there for a number of years before she moved back to Sudbury. So she even brought back kangaroo jerky for me as a little treat when she came back. I know.
A jerky.
Yeah.
Okay. And which wine would you pair with the jerky or plain kangaroo?
It's very gamey. So I would say like a big rich red, that would be your classic Australian Shiraz or something like that. I think, yeah, you need something that's as big as that flavor of the kangaroo to kind of match with it, I think.
Right. Okay, cool. Great. Then, because you've been to 36 countries, oh my goodness, you had a driver in New Zealand who was doing what while you were going around to
it's so bad. I teach dining etiquette, so it was so heartbreaking. But I mean, the first time we saw Clue, we were having lunch and he was sipping on a bottle of water, standing in the lobby waiting for us. It was a beautiful lobby where they had a tasting room on one side and the restaurant on the other. And he started taking the fruit out of the beautiful fruit bowls that are on coffee tables and things. And I didn't think anything of it. I thought, well, they're probably there for a reason. That's fine. Well, after that, every time we went to a winery, that sometimes they would offer you a cheese plate, for an additional price to go along with your flights. Once the people left, he started eating off their plates. To watch somebody from the winery, some of these are very small wineries, walking out and watching this man eating, ripping bread. And he basically pulled up a chair and he started finishing whatever they didn't finish.
He's like a human seagull.
Yeah, but he had no shame. It almost broke my heart thinking that he did not appear to be a first timer at this. You know what I mean? He just seemed to be a usual thing that he would normally do. And so I didn't quite have the heart to say, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Luckily, we only had about 2 more stops, I think, before the end of the day. But it was a little unnerving when you start thinking about, okay, well, I've been to wineries and I've left plates behind. So I'm hoping that's not an everyday occurrence, but you know what? He got to eat, which was great, but I wish he was a little more discreet. How's that?
You think? Yes. Now, I know one of your goals is to teach dining etiquette programs, especially when we're out in restaurants. So that reminds me of this. What are your top tip or two on dining etiquette? What should we be thinking of that kind of isn't on our radar when we're out at a restaurant?
I think having that kind of relationship or respect for your server is a really big deal. Sometimes you don't know what's going on for them. Because I had a lot of them work for me over the years, they all have their own personal stories. They may have worked very long shifts. Sometimes they don't get as much training as you think they do. So bombarding them with too many technical questions and asking them to choose the proper wine, that may not be their forte, or they haven't been trained on that, kind of puts them on the spot. It's just having that respect of little things. It sounds awful, but don't put your dirty napkins on top of the plates and stack everything, because they now have to pull everything apart, right? So they're putting their hands in your dirty napkin and pulling out bones and everything else. As long as you always think of somebody else or think of what others have to go through to bring you that food and clear it away, you'll always have a better dining experience, because they can actually pick up on the fact that you're respecting them.
Yeah, someone is cleaning up after you.
That's right.
Which country did you like the best?
I would say, well, my husband's probably going to agree with me. When we retire, some people say they're going to move to Florida. We are going to move to Spain.
Oh,
the food and wine culture there, it is so different than what we experience here in North America. Just the time of day they eat, how they appreciate food and the social aspects of their lives. The cost of living there is so much better than it is here.
And so how so with the different time of day and
they sleep in a little more. They don't work 8 to 10 hour days. They do have breaks later in the afternoon. A lot of times even stores and retail places are closed at 3:00 in the afternoon, because that's just when things close down, and it's just the way of life for them. And everybody goes out on patios and they're chatting. They all kind of go for a little siesta, or they kind of get ready for the evening. And then around 5 or 6 o'clock, the tapas bars are jammed full of people. And it is one big social party. Every street that has tapa bars, they actually organize them so they're always in kind of a street or an alley together. together. And people are in between suits, young people in their 20s, you can tell who are backpacking, to other people who are older retirees that are coming out to Europe for the first time. Everybody is chatting with everybody. Everybody is ordering this glass of wine and that little bite and some little bacalao, and then they move on to the next place. There's a late dinner that starts at 9:30, 10 o'clock. They do this like on a Wednesday.
Wow.
It sounds like a vacation every single day. I've always been a huge fan of the big, bold flavors of Spanish foods, and Spanish wines has always been really near and dear to our heart. So we've actually taken the time to pretty much tour the entire country.
Wow.
And that's one of our exciting things. We've always told friends that at some point we're going to arrange like a group thing and bring everybody with us. If we can bring everybody with us, we would.
Take me too. So what are your favorite tapas? What foods do you love best among different tapas offerings, and which wines to pair with them?
I love anything that is seafood related, such as classic bacalao, which is a fried cod fritter. It's mashed potatoes and cod, and yes, and it's deep fried. And then my perfect pairing with it is a classic albarino from Rías Baixas.
Nice zesty white.
Oh my gosh, it's almost salty. Until you have some of the ones that are from that area, you don't appreciate how much that sea salt air really affects that albarino. I'm starting to introduce it more and more people here in North America because it is such a classic example of a region that has a grape varietal that they do so well, and that is their claim to fame, and they don't deviate from it. They know what they do well, and that's what they do.
Anything else?
I would say that. And then, of course, the classic chorizo. I used to do one, which is really fascinating. It's really easy, and I don't even have to write a recipe for anyone for this. Take a fresh chorizo sausage, just roast it enough so that you can slice it in pieces, and then top it with red wine, and you're poaching it. So you're actually cooking the chorizo in red wine. So all of the garlic and paprika inside the sausage comes out into the wine, kind of makes its own sauce. And the chorizo takes on a whole different flavor because it's been poached in the red wine. And then just pairing that with a classic Rioja, maybe a Crianza or something. The chorizo, I think, is going to overpower it a little bit if you have something that's too big and bold. It's kind of like Spain on a little plate, that little bit of meat and that little bit of fat and the little bit of red wine sauce and then the classic Rioja. That's pretty much what everyone would have at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon in Spain.
I love the way you put it. Spain on a little plate.
Yes,
with
exactly.
All those flavors. Very nice. Very nice. What's the best wine trip to do to Spain? So you've been all over to Spain.
I have. I just did the northern part because we went through Galicia and then we went down to Rías Baixas and then went into the central areas around Leon. And then we made our way back to Logroño a little bit. That's when we were at Baron de Ley, which I mentioned in that other one. And then for all the foodies out there, ended the trip in San Sebastian, which is on the very northern part. And there's more Michelin star restaurants in that one little town than there is anywhere in the world.
Wow.
I know.
What town was that?
San Sebastian.
Oh, San Sebastian. That's where we're all headed then.
Yes, it's all in the Basque region. It is just something else. It's right on the ocean. It's gorgeous.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you're going to retire there, and we're all going to
come.
Yeah,
yeah. But I'm probably going to retire closer to Valencia, which is on the eastern side. It's still a fairly big city. It's close to Madrid. Madrid's one of my favorite cities in Spain. We still get close to the ocean a little bit, and then if you want some island flair, you can go over to Ibiza.
You know everything about everywhere. This is great.
Can I recommend quickly an albarino for someone who hasn't tried one before?
Please do.
A really good one. Look for Paco and Lola. It's a pretty big producer.
Polka dots?
They do. That's the one.
I love that label. It's fun.
Yes.
It reminds me of Kate Spade.
It's kind of cheeky. It's kind of fun, but it is a good example of a classic albarino. There's going to be a slightly different styles here and there compared to what we get. But for one that gets imported here to Canada, it's probably one of the better ones.
That's great. So you were just back, Stephanie, from the Niagara. Is it the Niagara Ice Wine Festival?
I was at both.
At both. And the wine fest. Yeah, you're a trooper. You're doing it all for us. So
we did it all in one weekend. So the Winter Wine Fest was the same weekend that the Ice Wine Festival opened. Okay. So yeah, my podcast co-hosts and I took them down for a little bit of a girls' weekend just to introduce them to all things Niagara in the middle of winter for one weekend. Yeah, they had an amazing time and they're already starting to book future trips down there now.
So what makes this festival, either one of them, different from other wine festivals? We know it's cold, it's ice wine, it's Niagara, but what was special about this particular festival that you went to?
I think both festivals, actually most of them, I mean, Niagara wine region, of course, has been one of the more popular ones for so long now that they've had this opportunity to create shows and festivals for so many years. They are so good at the logistics and the details of the event, as in you kind of know which producers are going to be there, you know what to expect, the details of the decor. Even though we were outside and it was really cold that night we were there, they had little chimeneas every so many feet. They had other kind of little torches set up. They had heated yurts at one end and another heated tent at the other. Somebody else was serving mulled wine, which is one of Cynthia's favorites. There were so many things, details that they really took the time to think of, down to a signpost that had almost like directional signs that you would see that were pointing to like this winery is over here and this one's over here. So if you had a favorite that you were looking for, like they just took the time for details. And those are kind of things that as event planners, as we are as well, we really notice and appreciate that, where we never had to question where something was.
Right. And
Right?
really keeping in mind the attendees' comfort, like with the warmth stations. And
They did a really good job. And then the Ice Wine Festival, the same thing. I mean, I love the concept of the Discovery Pass. I try to recommend that to a lot of people because there's Discovery Pass options pretty much in most wine regions now.
And what are they? What is a Discovery Pass?
Discovery Pass would be almost like a little passport where you're basically prepaying for so many samples. Sometimes it's just samples of wine. Sometimes it's samples of wine with an appetizer. It really does make a difference. You can go in for a flight or a tasting as you wish. But for something like the Discovery Pass, I think we paid a little bit more than $40 Canadian. And we had 8 wineries that we could visit. And everyone gave us a sample of ice wine with a small appetizer. I mean, it's such a great value, and it allowed us to probably sample things that we would not have normally tried at those particular wineries. So it got them to play around and show off a little bit, which was fun.
That's great. Were there any unusual events or aspects of either of the Ice Wine Festival or the Niagara Festival that you wanted to note?
I really think that the entertainment people didn't realize, and I've noticed that for other ones down there as well. I go there and expecting, sometimes they say live music and you just sort of shrug it off and you say, okay, there's going to be someone playing a guitar in the background. But they had Ashley McIsaac on the Friday night. This is the first night. And this was free to get on the premises. I mean, they had shuttle from parking that was down there. So a shuttle took you there so you didn't have to walk. Huge stage. Ashley McIsaac was there. If you wanted to stay for the after party afterwards, downstairs at the Cave Spring Cellar, they had a DJ doing an entire 90s theme with full decor. And the entry fee for that one was only $25. So the level of entertainment that they had on that weekend, and the same thing with some of the other festivals I've been noticing, not just down there, but some of the other ones, people are really wanting that full experience and not just there to sample wine, but really to have an event. It's that entire event where they're thinking about all of the sounds and the sights and the smells. It's the entire experience of being down there.
Bringing all the senses together. And I think that's why more and more wineries have these big amphitheaters and stages. Well, the bigger wineries that can afford it and have marquee names and bands play.
Yes.
So when it comes to festivals, you obviously like these two. What are your other top favorite wine festivals or shows that you've attended from anywhere in the world?
Okay. Oh my goodness, in the world.
Yeah. Or you can
so I want wine focus, because if you didn't go wine, so wine focus, because I went to other festivals. Well, okay, exactly. So I would say one of the ones I fell in love with last year was Graze the Bench. The Bench area down in, I guess it would be west of the northern part of Niagara region, I guess is the Bench area.
Yes.
I'm looking at a map in my head. That's why my eyes are facing up. But I like the idea of every single winery had its own event within this, and they're all fairly close to each other. And you can hop on and hop off the shuttle at any time throughout the afternoon. So you're wandering around through the grapevines, going from one winery to another. They had live music at every single winery. And you can actually control what samples that you wanted to pay for, whether they were appetizers from either an in-house chef or they actually brought someone in. They had some kind of wine that they wanted to showcase. You can basically pick and choose what you wanted to sample and where you wanted to go. What an amazing afternoon. So that's one of the ones that I actually bookmarked as soon as I left there. I think we were the only ones who tackled all the wineries in one afternoon, though.
You are so dedicated.
We are. I just didn't want to miss anything. So we actually went and saw all of them. It was so great.
What's the date for the Graze the Bench?
That one's Graze the Bench is June 1st and 2nd, that weekend. Yeah, so it'll be the Saturday and the Sunday from 12 to 5, I believe. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sure somebody who's actually knows it from that area is going to be correcting me soon. And then the other one would be La Grande Dégustation, which is the big wine tasting show in Montreal that happens in November every year. I found this event kind of by accident online. I think I was coming in for an Ottawa wine show at that same time. It happened to be around the same weekend. And we were on our way that way. So maybe we could tackle both. And I was really impressed with the different wines that they would have there because the SAQ can bring in a lot of things that we can't necessarily get here in Ontario. So anybody can go and buy the ticket for this. The number of wines that they pack into this, even though it's in a convention center, a pretty small space, there's some pretty big wines that you don't normally would get to see or try that are there. And a lot of the producers themselves come in for that one. It's a big, busy wine show to the point where last year I actually went 2 days in a row just to tackle maybe 2/3 of them.
That
I know.
sounds impressive.
It is. So that's a serious, you got to make a plan to go into that show.
That's great. The one I would throw in there, even though I have not yet been, I've got to go there, is the Vancouver Wine Festival, which reminds me of what you're talking about, Stephanie, in that the producers are there. It's you get to talk to the people who made the wine. Have you gone to the Vancouver Wine Festival yet?
No, I've been to Vancouver a couple of times, but there never seems to be a festival happening when I'm there.
It's a nice time of year. At least February, Vancouver is usually May. Our February is their May, I think, in terms of weather. But anyway, another one to note for your bucket list. Let me just finish up on ice wine. Was there an unusual or weird pairing that you had with ice wine that you really loved while you were there or any time in the past?
I wouldn't say there was anything completely abnormal. I've been trying to pair ice wines with more savory foods, especially for people who are doing dinners with me, because I want them to open up and realize that, yes, there's more than just dessert, right? Or creme brulee or dark chocolate. There are so many things that ice wine can pair with. One of the best, say it's strangest that people always look at me strange, is I think one of the first times I served it, it was a spicy Kentucky Fried Chicken. Is that awful?
I love it.
Right? It's that spicy, fatty, juicy meat thing. And then it reminds me of the chicken and waffles in the southern states where you would drizzle honey on it, right? So it still gets that little bit of sweetness to balance out the deep fried spiciness. And Inniskillen actually had at the Ice Wine Festival, they had a bit of a nod to that. And had an ice wine cocoa sauce. It was a little bit different, but they had that vanilla waffle with a piece of fried chicken on it. And that's kind of reminded me of, said, oh yeah, I forgot about. So now, when you get that bucket of KFC, now try it with some ice wine.
Oh, that sounds so good. That sounds so decadent. I can feel the ice wine melting the crispiness of the fat chicken. Ugh.
Oh, I know.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes, please. The other thing that I love ice wine too, and I love your point about it's not just a dessert wine, caramelized meat. So caramelization, you being the chef, will give you that toffee sweet flavor on meats. And it's amazing with ice wine that to me is all about apricot preserves and peach. And there's a whole world of pleasure that many people haven't experienced yet with those kind of pairings.
Yeah. So I'd like to see somebody experiment with trying, maybe taking that bottle of ice wine that you usually save for a dessert course and try it with even your appetizer course or have it on the side with the entree just to give it a whirl. Roast pig on a spit. Ooh. There's a lot of really great options out there. It's just a matter of playing around with it a little bit.
All right. Well, as we transition from one topic to another, now I was listening to your wonderful podcast, Flying for Flavour, and you had this question. I don't know if it came in from a reader or I think it did. A listener. If you could open a winery, what would you make at that winery? And then I'll follow up with what would you call that winery? But first of all, which wines would you make at your winery that you would open?
I am an old school girl. I happen to love the classics. So Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are probably my two all-time favorite varietals. But I am such a fan of unfiltered Chardonnay and Pinot Noirs right now. I think it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. There was a little producer in California, Elizabeth Spencer. For any of you who are down there, want to go and look them up. It's a tiny little tasting room. They make spectacular Chardonnays, but her unfiltered Chardonnay that she had at that time, the family was producing. It was just a different experience because I feel like you taste the entire grape.
Explain what unfiltered is for those of us who don't know.
Yeah, it's cloudy. It doesn't go through that filtration process where it's completely clear. You hold it up and you're kind of wondering how there's some sediment in the bottom of the bottle, but it has a completely different mouthfeel to it. I like it on its own. And I've been really trying to purchase more of them as I'm finding them to experiment with how a classic, completely filtered Chardonnay would pair with one dish as compared to that really rich, round and buttery, unfiltered Chardonnay. How does that really differ? And maybe I'd be changing the ingredients in a dish based on that. So yeah, so Elizabeth Spencer was a great one. And then I would have to give a nod to Tapas is really doing a great unfiltered Pinot Noir. I tend to buy in really large bottles when they make their release. Again, I love that classic Pinot Noir is always dry, but still very fruity. And having that unfiltered concept to it, or it's a completely different taste experience when you stop filtering wine so much.
There's more stuffing or something, and there is particulate, but it just adds to the flavor. It's like those little amino acids in cheese, like you crunch on them and then there's a flavor explosion. It's just there's more stuff in the wine. And Taws, for anyone who may not know, is a Niagara winery, top of the line, Tawse, Taws.
That's correct.
All right. So that's what you would produce at your winery. What would you call your winery?
Oh, it's a little cheeky. I've always liked the name. I debated whether I was going to call a wine bar that, but I always wanted to call it Lush.
Yes.
Lush, because it's not just a great term for how those wines would taste and feel in your mouth, but also because it kind of cheeky nod to someone who drinks a lot of wine.
That's good.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. I always love that word. So I'm looking for my next business opportunity. So if you see Lush coming out someplace, that's where it's going to come from.
All right. I want to get to a couple of questions based on a couple of podcasts you did on Nova Scotia. So good. I mean, you really dug down and met a lot of great people there. Let me skip forward here to, okay, so L'Acadie Blanc is a zesty white grape that was first developed in Ontario, but is now the signature grape of Nova Scotia. So how did it end up there, and why didn't it work here in Ontario?
Well, I mean, they tried here from what I was always reading and they were telling me about. I guess they developed because it's a hybrid grape that was developed here in the Niagara area. They were kind of doing some experimentation on it. And because they were kind of playing around with it and they weren't getting the greatest success, so they actually sent it to the Kentville station in Nova Scotia. And they actually have another lab there. They started playing around with it a little bit more and started planting a little bit more and playing. And they noticed that because it has such a short growing season, it could withstand, and because it could withstand colder temperatures a little bit longer, they just had more of a chance to allow it to develop and ripen the way it should. So even though we may get some cold days, like it is here in Sudbury right now, our temperature fluctuates much more drastically here than it does out there. So it just has more time to slowly develop and kind of get to where it needs to be. So they just have an easier time growing it there than they do here.
Interesting. And then you had a great story where you visited Luckett Vineyards, which I'm from originally Nova Scotia. So I grew up in Lower Sackville outside of Halifax. And my parents were from Cape Breton. And so Pete Luckett owned Luckett's Boutique, or the fine food store. He still does,
yes.
I assume. And he started this vineyard, which I just have to say has a British phone booth in the middle of it, this red British phone booth where you can call around the world. It's wonderful and bizarre because the vines are all around it. But you were talking with the winemaker, Mike Mainguy. Do I have the right name?
You do.
Okay. So he did an experiment with burying 3 barrels of wine. Why was he doing that? How deep was it? What happened?
I had to make some notes and stuff on that, but one of the people that they were working with there at Luckett was chatting with a winemaker from Switzerland. And they had already experimented by burying some barrels of wine of Chasselas and Saint Laurent there to see what would happen. And they were having some success. So they thought, let's try it here. And I guess they kept pushing Mike and pushing him. And he was so nervous about it. I mean, you know how long it takes, of course, to produce and get 3 barrels of wine. So we're just going to bury it and hope for the best. But the more he kept chatting with them, and he was finally convinced, and they did bury 3 barrels of single varietals. I think they did a Maréchal Foch, a Leon Malot, and I can't remember the other one offhand. But there's 3 red grapes that they buried individually, and they left them down there. I think the first time was only a year. And then they brought them up and they actually did a blend with them. And they found that there's very little evaporation down there. The wines were much softer than they found than it was maybe aging in a cellar as a difference. And they're doing white wines as well. They actually bury them now for, they said, I think 28 months was the longest that they've done now. So now they're doing about 10 barrels of red, and I think they said about 8 barrels of white. So the Lac du Blanc would be one of the ones that they've been playing around with. And the buried whites or buried reds is what they're called at Luckett, and they fly off the shelves.
Wow. And they're the most expensive wines?
Yeah, I think he said it's around $38 a bottle Canadian, which would be a little pricey on our end, especially if direct from a winery. But they said they can't keep it on the shelves. And they said they've tried to do blind tastings with people to find out what it is. And usually everyone, even with a blind tasting, can always identify a buried wine versus wine directly from their cellar.
Wow. And that's the only variable that has changed. It's just the fact that these barrels were buried. So yeah, the constant temperature, humidity. In some ways, is that like the wines that they're finding that went down with a ship, like not Titanic, but other ships, and that at the bottom of the ocean, maybe similar contained constant conditions?
Yeah. And I'm finding that some of them, that's what he was explaining to us, that in California, there's a lot of winemakers up there in Napa Valley area that are experimenting the same way, where instead of burying them maybe underground, they're actually putting the barrels in the ocean. And they're trying to recreate that same constant temperature and constant conditions that actually lets the wine be the wine and do its thing without having to have all these fluctuations that are around them. I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that kind of style and experimentation. You basically sort of have to dig for your wine, I think, going forward. It should be interesting.
I like that. Dig for it. Get down to the roots. When they barrel age above ground, they talk about the angel share, which is the escaping little bits. So I wonder if under the ocean, is it the mermaid share? Or?
Oh, maybe. Oh, I bet you someone's going to call a winery that now or something.
Share.
Mermaid share, right?
Should have trademarked it. Oh, well.
You should have.
Oh, well.
That's okay. I'll vouch for you. I'll vouch for you.
Thanks. Is there any advice you would give to your 30-year-old self, Stephanie?
For me, I would start being self-employed much sooner.
Okay.
And it was only because as much as I had all these passions for, foods and drinks and travel and different cultures, I didn't act on it soon enough. And I think about how much further I even would be now if I would have started much earlier. It just, entrepreneurship was not something that was in my brain at the time. I know.
Underscore that. I would say yes. That's my path too. I hear you, sister. All right. What is the best piece of wine advice that you've ever received?
Watch your serving temperatures. I think, again, it was California. I'm going back to California. And it was probably the first time I was there. I was surprised at how they were serving some of their Chardonnays at room temperature. I was a little sort of taken aback by that because I always tend to like my whites cool and reds, and that's how I'd always experienced them. And it was a different tasting experience when you have them at different temperatures. So now I'm always coaching people saying that the lighter the wine, the colder the temperature can be. And then the heavier and darker the wine, the little bit warmer it can be so that it can be fully developed. It's interesting to see that even some of the reds, I notice when they're too warm. Especially when I'm traveling or to hotter climates, sometimes they're having them on shelves and they take them down and they ask me if I'm crazy because I'm asking them, can you just chill this for like 2 minutes? When a red wine is too warm, it just gets beyond that and you're not getting the same flavors anymore. So I'm really noticing, serving temperature is a really big deal for me now.
Absolutely. I would echo that too. Red's too warm, just taste alcoholic and flabby. White's too cold or numbed out of existence. You don't taste anything. But were they serving those robust Chardonnays in California a bit warmer, like at room temperature, so you could get more out of them?
Yeah. Especially for samples, because if they're just giving you a quick splash of it, they want to show you where that Chardonnay is supposed to be. And then you can decide from there on how you're serving temperatures. But it was surprising. It was the very first time I went to a wine region where they weren't serving it based on what the customer wanted. They were serving it based on what they wanted you to see.
So I always ask about wine gadgets, but you have a couple of wine tools to share with us tonight.
Well, they're not quite, one of them's tool. I think it's kind of funny. But anyways, it's my Rabbit. It is a wine shower funnel. I don't know if you've ever done these before. Because I tend to drink wines with sediment, as I already went through that. Sometimes it's not just because I want it unfiltered, but sometimes they're just older bottles. So I like the idea that it's not much of an aerator on the one part, but the other side has a really good fine strainer on it. It's a one-stop shop. All I have to do is slowly pour this into a decanter, and it's not only going to allow a little bit more oxygen to get into it, but it will get rid of a lot of the bigger pieces of sediment that are in the wines. The two-sided funnel, so I can use it with or without the strainer. So it's
Okay.
two-part and it'll go inside the carafe and then I'll
Okay.
slowly pour the wine in. So it's aerating as it goes in, but it's
Huh.
also straining it at the same time.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
I know. So that's one of my I use this often, especially for some of my older wines. And the other one's not really a tool. I just thought it was really cute. I guess it's mostly for the ladies. Everyone needs to get wine wipes. So they are like those little handy wipes that you get when you go and get something sticky for your fingers, but it is specifically designed to clean red wine stains off of your teeth and your tongue. I don't know. There's some places in Canada and some kitchen stores, I find them occasionally, but you can order them through Amazon or online some places. They come in little single ones like this. And then sometimes they're in a little compact that have like maybe 20 of them in there. So it's kind of discreet. No one knows what they are, but it's
Excellent.
magic. It takes off all the
purple.
especially when you're having those really big reds.
Yeah.
Stay classy when you're
Well,
doing that
yeah,
stuff,
you
right?
don't want to look like an extra in Night of the Zombies or something.
Exactly.
So, but do you know anything about, are they tough on enamel? Do you know anything about?
No, I've just never, if you scrape them and use them on an ongoing basis, but there's all fairly natural ingredients. I say natural. There's even down to something like an orange juice, natural flavor, citric acid. There's a touch of hydrogen peroxide, so it's acting quickly, but I don't feel anything. I don't taste anything.
Okay.
There's a very thin little piece of paper. It's not like a big handy wipe. It's much smaller, but it's just enough just to give you a quick cleanup right in between. So I always have some in my purse.
Yeah, I think I should take those when I go to the LCBO for tastings and taste like 50 more wines. And then I end up going to lunch. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. Do you have the money for this lunch? Yes, I do.
Yeah, they're kind of handy and they're so thin that you can kind of tuck them in like pockets or something. But
Very
they've been really great, especially when you're going to bigger wine shows or events when you're tasting a number of wines. Like the Bordeaux show, these were handy by the end of the night for sure.
That's great. That's great. So if you could share a bottle of wine with someone living or dead, who would that be? What would you ask them? What bottle would it be? That sort of thing.
Okay. Oh, I don't want to get emotional about it, but I would have to say I've been a huge fan of his for so long, and now he's really starting to make the news now. And it's Chef Jose Andres.
Okay.
He's in the news a lot now, even though he's been a very renowned chef from Spain who moved to the US. I've actually been going to some of his restaurants around the States. He started what's called our World Central Kitchens, and it is a nonprofit organization that feeds people during disasters.
Oh.
So he's actually up for a Nobel Peace Prize this year for the first time. I've been cheering him on and retweeting everything he does. He does a lot of live videos on Twitter showcasing, like he was there in Puerto Rico when they got struck by the hurricane. He's been there just about every city. He was in Mexico and he's been setting up kitchens and recruiting home cooks, sous chefs, restaurateurs, just to help prepare foods and to feed people hot meal, whether they are there because they're there for disaster relief or they're there because they just actually need a good meal that day. Just the amount of time and energy that he's put into these things. And I thought, man, that needs a break. And I would take probably one of my best Spanish wines from my cellar and I would share it with him because I thought, you know what? I want to be the one to say, put your feet up for a second. I'm going to pour you a glass of wine. I'm going to give you a little bit of chorizo. I'm going to give you a little bit of bacalao to bring you back to Spain and just sort of relax for a minute because he has not stopped with one disaster thing after another. And right now he's even feeding a lot of federal workers throughout the States who were on furlough because of the shutdown. So they were setting up small, almost like soup kitchen type things all about the States right now, even just giving soups and sandwiches to people like police officers or other law enforcement personnel who may have been without paychecks for a couple of weeks. So his heart is so big. If I could just feed him and give him wine, it'd make me very happy.
That is lovely. I love that. Most original answer I think I've heard to that question. So thank you, Stephanie.
Gosh, you're welcome. So all I would tell people is that just to say thank you to him, if you know or near his restaurants, by going to his restaurants, you're probably not just supporting him and his staff, but you're probably also supporting World Central Kitchens.
Okay. Let's drink to that and eat to that for sure.
That's right.
So as we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to mention at this point?
The only thing I would like to mention, it has to do with encouraging people, even if the funds aren't there right now, to really start saving up and traveling more. And not just travel to, I don't want to knock all-inclusive resorts because I go to them often myself, but going to other countries, especially if you love wine, if there's a particular wine that you've always loved, go and see where it's made. Go and talk to the people who are making it. Go and eat the foods that they do, because most of the time they've been producing wines to go with those foods. Get involved with the surroundings, see how the land is, how close they are to the ocean, and kind of take it all in. It's a completely different experience to taste the same wine where it's made as it is when you take it home from your store. I think it really opens your eyes and you get to meet a lot of people. I think one of the biggest things for me, I love the fact that I can go through my Facebook page and I still keep in touch with people I've met on my travels over the years from all over the world, which is probably one of the happiest things for me.
That's terrific.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Where can we find you, Stephanie?
Oh my goodness. I'm on just about everything on social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter. I also have a YouTube channel, which I have to admit, I'm not as good at uploading all my videos there personally. But then on the Flying for Flavor podcast, we're on all of the podcast players, including Spotify, iHeartRadio, of course, Apple Podcasts. And then our podcast has its own Facebook page, Instagram feed, Twitter feed, and YouTube channel. So you can not only listen to the podcast, but you can also watch the entire thing.
There's
Basically
no excuse not to catch that show.
Exactly. Not to mention, it's three girls sitting around drinking, talking about food, drinks, and travel.
It's a lot of fun. I love it. I want to be part of that group. But anyway.
I told you. You're going to be our regular guest.
Yay.
Yay.
You did such a great job with the podcast. I know you spend a lot of your time on that. Preparing, scripting, editing, it's natural. I can just tell the amount of work that goes into it and the value in each podcast with all your travel tips, food and wine. It's really worth seeking out, folks.
Well, I appreciate that because I know that you're a fellow podcaster yourself.
I'm a newbie.
You were a newbie, but I remember I was there and I said, I know how much work it goes into it. And so every time that somebody new discovers a new podcast and shares it with somebody, it kind of opens us up to all kinds of other possibilities. And I think podcasts are going to be even bigger in 2019.
Oh, I do too. And I think there's a really deep connection. I mean, I love this live video, but that's the other side of things, the audio. And whenever you want to listen to it, I think there's real power there.
There is.
For sure.
Exactly.
Oh, Stephanie, thank you so much for spending your time with us. We so appreciate it. I mean, it's just wonderful. The time went like that, and we love your stories. We love you. And
thank you. We love you too.
Hope to have you back again because
I'd love
so much fun. All
yes,
right.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Here are my takeaways from this terrific discussion with Stephanie. Number 1, I love the way she weaves stories around her travels, whether it's tasting wine in an old cellar in Nice or encountering a kangaroo in Australia. 2, Stephanie anchors food and wine to place, like the bacala in Albarino or the Spanish chorizo sausage in Rioja wine, which she calls Spain on a little plate. I love that. She, like me, believes that traveling to a place to learn about food and wine is one of the best ways that you can learn about it, as well as the country's culture. And she advises us not to wait till we have the funds to go first class. Just go. Number 4, I love Stephanie's advice to pair ice wine with a main meal, not just dessert, and I cannot wait to try KFC with it. And number 5, she had some really interesting backstories for why the Nova Scotia grape L'Acadie Blanc excelled there, but not in Ontario, where it's also a cool climate, and how burying wines can make them taste even smoother. You'll find links to Stephanie's website and social media handles, as well as the 2 gadgets she recommended, the strainer and the wine wipes, in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/49. I've also posted a link to the video version of this interview. So what was your favorite tip or quote from this episode? Share that with me on Twitter or Facebook and tag me at Natalie MacLean. On Instagram, I'm at Natalie MacLean Wine. If you liked this episode, please tell a friend about it this week, especially one who's interested in learning more about food and wine pairing. My podcast is easy to find whether you search Google on its name, Unreserved Wine Talk, or on my name. Finally, if you want to take your ability to pair wine and food to the next level, join me in a free online video class at nataliemaclean.com/class. I can't wait to share more wine stories with you next week. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this one. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps some Rioja with a little chorizo sausage on the side. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.